For 500,000 years, Earth had been silent. Humanity had been caged, reduced to whispers beneath the shadow of the Sarah Empire, a dominion so vast and ancient that even stars seemed to bow before its will. Generations were born and died believing that survival meant obedience, that to look outward into the galaxy was to invite destruction. But silence is never eternal. Beneath the soil of Earth, within the deep oceans, and hidden inside the forgotten ruins of cities long buried, humanity had been preparing. Quietly. Patiently. For 500,000 years, while the galaxy thought them broken, humans were learning. Studying. Remembering. When the Sarah Empire finally turned its attention elsewhere, loosening its grip, it made the same mistake every conqueror eventually makes: it underestimated the silence of the oppressed. And so, the awakening began. The first signal. It started not with a war cry, but with a pulse, a transmission of exquisite precision. Carried on frequencies older than any empire, the signal spread across the stars like a ripple on still water. The message was simple: humanity has returned. It wasn't a threat. Not yet. It was a reminder that Earth, the world once shackled, had endured. The Sarah Empire's outposts, scattered across forgotten sectors, were the first to feel it. Entire garrisons awoke to systems failing, fleets found their navigation compromised, and their soldiers spoke of ghostly voices on their comms whispering in languages they didn't understand. It wasn't an invasion. It was psychological warfare. The Empire began to feel unease, something they had not felt in millennia. And unease, for a civilization built on control, was more dangerous than any weapon. The hidden arsenal. Where had humans been all this time? Beneath Earth's surface, entire networks of machines had been sleeping. Not mindless automata, but constructs shaped by generations of survivors who had long ago abandoned weakness. These machines carried memories of every age of humanity, the wisdom of philosophers, the cunning of generals, the creativity of artists, and the ruthlessness of rebels. To the galaxy, humanity appeared suddenly armed with technology that rivaled the greatest powers. But it wasn't technology alone. It was intention. Each strike was calculated. Each disruption precise. A convoy here, a supply line there, always just enough to spread fear, never enough to reveal the full hand. To the average citizen of the Sarah Empire, humanity seemed less like a species and more like a myth. A whisper in the void. A ghost returning from extinction. The Empire's fear. The Sarah rulers, ancient and proud, had seen countless rebellions rise and fall. But this was different. Most uprisings screamed for attention, seeking legitimacy, begging for recognition. Humanity, however, did not scream. They barely spoke. They did not claim territory. They did not send emissaries. They simply acted, like a storm that no one could predict. And in that silence, fear grew. Admirals began to question whether their fleets were truly safe. Governors wondered if their communications could be trusted. And among the younger generations of Sarah's citizens, a dangerous thought began to spread: perhaps the Empire was not eternal after all. For a civilization that had thrived on the illusion of permanence, this was poison. The question of humanity. But what was humanity now? 500,000 years is enough time to change everything: biology, culture, even the essence of memory. The humans who rose from silence were not the same as those first enslaved. They were something new, something forged under impossible pressure. Some said they were no longer human at all, but a species evolved for vengeance. Others whispered they had become more like their machines, cold and calculating. And yet, beneath it all, something ancient remained: that stubborn spark of defiance, the same fire that once carried fragile wooden ships across oceans, that launched rockets into the void, that refused to bow even when the galaxy demanded submission. That spark could not be extinguished. It had only been waiting. The galaxy watches. The Sarah Empire was not alone in the stars. Dozens of other civilizations, great and small, watched the unfolding events with wary curiosity. For 500,000 years, Earth had been irrelevant, a conquered world not worth mentioning. Now, suddenly, it was a player, perhaps the most dangerous player of all. Some species watched with hope, others with dread. A few whispered of an ancient prophecy, one that spoke of the sleeping world that would one day awaken to challenge the order of the galaxy. And then came the Harari. The Harari were old, neutral, and enigmatic, a race that claimed no empire, but who carried knowledge older than the Sera themselves. They reached out, not with weapons, but with warnings. You think the Sera are your greatest enemy, they said. But there are older architects of fate, hidden in the dark between galaxies. If you rise too high, too fast, you will draw their gaze. It was the first hint that humanity's war with the Sera Empire was only the beginning. The silent choice. On Earth, the question became unavoidable, what now? Humanity could strike openly, ignite a war that might consume half the galaxy. Or they could continue their shadow war, unraveling the empire piece by piece until it collapsed under its own weight. Every decision was heavy with consequence. A wrong move might reveal their hand too soon. A hesitation might give the Sera time to adapt. And yet, through it all, there was no rush. Humans had waited 500,000 years. They could wait a little longer. The silence, once a prison, had become their weapon. Closing hook. The galaxy was no longer certain of its masters. The Sera Empire trembled, the Harari whispered warnings of a greater threat, and humanity stood on the edge of revelation. Were they saviors? Destroyers? Or something far more unpredictable? Only one thing was certain. The silence was broken. And the stars would never be the same again. The galaxy expected fire and thunder. They expected humanity, long enslaved, to rise with vengeance burning in their veins, to strike openly against the Sera Empire in a storm of ships and weapons. But humanity did not fight like that. Instead, the war unfolded like a whisper. A war of shadows. A war of silence. Striking the mind before the flesh. The Sera Empire's fleets were vast. Planetary garrisons stretched across hundreds of systems. Against such strength, no single species could stand in open conflict. And humanity knew this. So they never challenged the Empire head-on. Instead, they turned the Empire's greatest strength, its vastness, into weakness. Supply chains faltered. A convoy of food ships would vanish, not destroyed, but simply gone, erased from sensors as though swallowed by the void. Entire communication hubs awoke to find their signals replaced with recordings of ancient human voices reciting poetry, philosophy, even lullabies. To the Sera soldiers, these were not harmless fragments of history. They were haunting. Unnerving. It was as though the humans were not simply fighting the Empire's body, but its soul. The Empire questions itself. Soon, whispers spread not only among citizens, but among the soldiers themselves. Had the humans truly survived unchanged? Were they ghosts? Were they something more than flesh and bone? Paranoia infected the barracks. Fleet captains no longer trusted their own navigators. Colonists began refusing to pay taxes, insisting that the Empire's grip was loosening. And all the while, humanity said nothing. No speeches. No declarations. Only the silence of a predator circling unseen. For the first time in millennia, the Sera Empire found itself staring into the unknown. And the unknown terrified them. The Harari's warning. While the Sera panicked, the Harari watched. The Harari were ancient and distant, a people who had never bowed to the Empire yet never sought conquest of their own. They studied the stars as others studied scripture. To them, every rise and fall of empires was merely a verse in a longer song. When they approached humanity, it was not as conquerors, nor as allies, but as messengers. They spoke softly. You believe your silence has hidden you. You believe you are unseen. But there are others who listen. Others who have always listened. They called them the architects, not gods, not demons, but something older, something that shaped galaxies as humans once shaped clay. According to the Harari, the architects watched from beyond, intervening only when civilizations grew too bold, too dangerous. If you draw too much attention, the Harari warned, they will come. And when they come, there will be no empire, no rebellion, no survival. Only silence. It was not a threat. It was a plea. Humanity's dilemma. The warning spread like fire through humanity's hidden networks. Some argued that the Harari sought only to scare them into submission. Others believed the threat was real, that humanity, in its hunger for freedom, might awaken something far worse than the Sera Empire. But humans had been silent for 500,000 years. And patience had its limits. To remain cautious was to risk their momentum, to let the empire recover. To strike boldly was to risk awakening whatever lay beyond the galaxy's edge. It was a choice between chains and oblivion. And yet, humans had always thrived in impossible choices. The Empire's counterstroke. Meanwhile, the Sera Empire could not remain passive. For the first time in living memory, they mobilized fully. Entire sectors were placed under martial law. Fleets the size of continents swept through space, burning any world suspected of aiding the humans. Cities vanished in firestorms, billions silenced as the Empire tried desperately to remind the galaxy of its dominance. But the harder the Empire struck, the weaker it appeared. Every act of cruelty only fueled the myth of humanity's return. Species long cowed by Sera rule began whispering of rebellion. Some reached out to humanity in secret, offering resources, intelligence, even soldiers. The Empire was bleeding, not from open wounds, but from within. Seeds of rebellion. In hidden corners of the galaxy, human envoys appeared. Not leaders, not diplomats, but fragments of humanity, a voice in a darkened chamber, a projection on a wall, a symbol carved into the stone of occupied worlds. They spoke not of conquest, but of choice. Imagine a galaxy where no empire decides who you are. Where no chains bind your children. Where silence is no longer survival, but peace. To the enslaved and the forgotten, these words were not propaganda. They were hope. The humans were not simply fighting a war. They were planting seeds. Seeds that might grow into a galaxy the Empire could not control. The Sera fracture. The Sera rulers, for all their arrogance, were not blind. They saw the fractures spreading across their empire. They felt the loyalty of their subjects slipping away. And within their own ranks, doubt festered. Some generals quietly questioned whether humanity could truly be stopped. Some even wondered if siding with the humans might secure their own survival. For an empire that had endured for eons, such thoughts were dangerous. The Sera had always believed themselves immortal. But immortality, humanity reminded them, is a story empires tell themselves before they fall. Humanity's choice. On Earth, in the hidden councils beneath the oceans and within the silent machines that carried the memory of their ancestors, humanity debated. Would they continue their shadow war, dismantling the empire piece by piece? Or would they risk everything in a single, decisive strike, a blow that might topple the Sera forever but reveal them fully to the galaxy? The Harari's warning echoed through every chamber, the architects are watching. But humanity had a question of their own. If the architects were truly so powerful, why had they allowed the Sera to rule unchallenged for 500,000 years? Perhaps the greater danger was not awakening the architects. Perhaps the greater danger was believing in them. Closing hook. The galaxy hung on the edge of a knife. The Sera Empire lashed out like a cornered beast. The Harari whispered of a threat greater than empires. And humanity, silent, patient, calculating, prepared to make its choice. Would they rise as liberators? As destroyers? Or as something the galaxy could not yet imagine? The answer would shape not only the war against the Sera, but the fate of every star. For 500,000 years, the galaxy had believed the Sarah Empire eternal. For 500,000 years, humanity had been silent. Now, both illusions were broken. The Empire's fleets burned across the stars in desperation, their violence no longer a sign of strength but of fear. Rebellion spread like wildfire. And in the heart of this chaos, humanity stood poised between two destinies, liberators of the oppressed, or catalysts of galactic ruin. But as the galaxy trembled, something older stirred. Something that had been listening all along. The first glimpse. It began on the edge of known space. An exploratory Sarah fleet, desperate to cut off humanity's hidden supply lines, vanished without a trace. When search vessels arrived, they found wreckage, not destroyed by weapons, but reshaped. Entire ships twisted into impossible geometries, hulls folded inward as though space itself had turned against them. And etched into the shattered remains was a single symbol, older than any Sarah record, older than the Harari themselves, a spiral of light, recursive, infinite. The Harari gave it a name in whispers, the mark of the architects. The Harari's truth. When the Harari came again to humanity, their tone was no longer warning but mourning. "We told you," they said. They do not act until they must. They waited for silence to break. And now, they are awake. The Harari spoke of ancient cycles, civilizations that had risen too far, too fast, only to vanish without trace. To most, these were myths. To the Harari, they were history, hidden in ruins scattered across forgotten worlds. The architects, they explained, were not conquerors in the way empires are conquerors. They did not enslave. They did not govern. They removed. Like gardeners pruning overgrown branches, they cut away any species that threatened the balance of the cosmos. And humanity, with their silence shattered and their defiance spreading like fire, had drawn their gaze. Humanity decides. The choice was clear, yet unbearable. Continue the war against the Sarah, and risk attracting the full force of the architects. Or retreat back into silence, and let the empire recover. But humans had not waited 500,000 years to surrender. In secret conclaves, across oceans, beneath mountains, and in the endless data streams of their machines, they chose a third path. They would not kneel to the empire. They would not hide from the architects. They would show the galaxy, and whatever watched from beyond, what it truly meant to be human. The message to the stars. It came without warning. Every channel, every frequency, every comm relay across the galaxy erupted with the same signal. It was not a threat. Not a declaration of war. It was a story. Images of Earth's long struggle filled the stars, the rise of civilizations, the fall into slavery, the silence of waiting, and the return of defiance. The message was clear. We are here. We are human. And we will not vanish quietly. To the oppressed, it was hope. To the empire, it was defiance. To the architects, it was a challenge. The architects respond. Their arrival was not like fleets descending. It was not the roar of weapons. It was silence, deeper than any silence humanity had ever known. Stars dimmed. Gravity shifted. Space itself bent as structures of impossible scale emerged, vast shapes half in reality, half beyond perception. No one could say whether they were ships, beings, or something stranger. Where they appeared, Sarah fleets disintegrated, not destroyed but unmade. Worlds were left untouched, but their skies carried the spiral mark of the architects. For the first time in their history, the Sarah Empire knew terror beyond comprehension. The unexpected turn. But when the architects turned their gaze to Earth, something different happened. Instead of destruction, there was pause. The machines beneath Earth stirred, their ancient cores humming in resonance with the spiral. For the first time, humanity realized that their silence had not been theirs alone. For 500,000 years, the architects had left them untouched. Not because they were irrelevant, but because they were being prepared. The Harari had only told part of the truth. The architects were not merely executioners. They were testers. They shaped species through fire, through silence, through suffering, until those species became something the architects themselves could not predict. And humanity, forged in silence, had become that unpredictable spark. The collapse of the empire. While the architects lingered at the edge of perception, the Sarah Empire began to implode. Entire sectors broke away, rebellion spreading faster than the empire could contain. Without certainty, without faith in their eternal rule, the Sarah were no longer gods. They were only tyrants. And tyrants could fall. Humanity did not conquer. They simply let the empire collapse under its own weight. In the ashes, worlds once enslaved began to breathe freely. And everywhere, people asked the same question. Had humanity saved them? Or doomed them all? The final silence. The architects did not stay. They vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving only their mark upon the stars. But their silence was different now. Not absence, but presence, the silence of something waiting, watching, judging. Humanity had survived them, at least for now. But survival was not the same as victory. The Harari reminded them. Every cycle ends the same. The architects return. The only question is when. The human answer. On Earth, beneath skies scarred by history and hope, humanity gave its reply, not in words, but in action. They rebuilt. They reached outward. They forged alliances with species once enslaved, teaching them what it meant to endure, to resist, to hope. Perhaps the architects would return. Perhaps the cycle would end as it always had. But humanity was not a cycle. Humanity was not predictable. Humanity was a question the universe had never been able to answer. And that was their greatest weapon. Closing reflection. In the end, the galaxy did not remember the Sarah Empire's dominion, nor the fear of the architect's shadow. It remembered the moment when one species, silent for 500,000 years, chose not just to survive, but to stand, to speak, to defy. Not with noise. Not with rage. But with the quiet certainty of a people who had endured the impossible and emerged unbroken. Humanity was no longer silent. And the stars would never forget.